they're not nearly as clean as we've been told. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. The sun, friend to all living creatures, except the Irish. Besides providing life, the sun is also a great source of energy. The Biden administration has said they want solar energy to power nearly half of the U.S. electricity supply by 2050. But we're still a long way from that. To get there, yearly solar capacity additions will need to double annually through 2025, before quadrupling from 2020's level each year between 2025 and 2030. Could we even reach that goal without needing people walking around in solar suits? I can't tell if this is the coolest or the lamest thing I've ever seen. According to a new study by the U.S. Department of Energy, the U.S. has the potential to get to a zero-carbon grid through solar. According to Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, the study shows that solar could produce enough electricity to power all of the homes in the U.S. by 2035 and employ as many as 1.5 million people in the process. Well, that sounds great. Is it realistic? Not sure, especially the 1.5 million jobs part, since America hardly makes any solar panels these days. So, sorry if you were hoping to be this rejected G.I. Joe ninja for Halloween this year. Solar panels were invented in America by Bell Labs in 1954. Nearly all the solar energy patents since then have been in America. In 1978, America was making 95% of the world's solar panels. But by the 1980s, globalization began happening on a big scale. First, Japan started taking over solar panel manufacturing. And if Americans thought that was bad, by the late 2000s, it was dominated by China. Today, only one of the world's 10 largest makers of solar cells is American. Most solar panels Americans buy nowadays are assembled in China. And when they're made in China, it's not exactly green energy. I'll explain after the break. Welcome back. Americans love solar panels. We'd slap them on our burgers if we could. Now that's a power lunch. But the true cost of solar panels is far greater than what we've been paying. To make solar panels, you need a lot of base metals, including aluminum, copper, and zinc. The use of all three metals in the solar sector is set to double by 2040. Solar panels also need cobalt, a metal used for building batteries. But a lot of these metals come from countries with very poor labor laws. Fun fact, if you say poor labor laws in a mirror 5 times, China will appear behind you and put you to work. Take the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC. It's one of the biggest countries in Africa and also one of the least democratic. It's also one of the world's top 10 sources of rare earth metals. Unfortunately for the big corporations that want to extract those metals, the DRC has basically no human rights standards for workers.
These guys are climbing into these holes, straddling railroad ties and hauling up tons of cobalt with makeshift rope and no proper safety equipment or support whatsoever.
In January 2016, a human rights report alerted the world to how cobalt is often dug up by hand under unsafe, sometimes deadly conditions by subsistence miners, including children.
And China just so happens to operate a lot of these unsafe cobalt mines in the DRC. All right, who in the DRC said poor labor laws in the mirror 5 times? Mining in the DRC sounds pretty bad, but not compared to how China treats many of its own workers in solar panel manufacturing. See, making solar panels is quite labor intensive. It starts with making photovoltaic cells, or PV cells for short. The first couple of steps of making these PV cells involves processing quartz, turning it into metallurgical grade silicon, and then refining that into polysilicon. Well, that sounds complicated. Is China finding high-skilled workers and paying them well for their expertise? No, they're using slave labor. According to this report about forced labor in global supply chains, 95% of solar modules rely on one primary material, solar-grade polysilicon. And China accounts for 75% of the world's polysilicon supply. Most of that comes from Xinjiang, which is a region of China. And if you've been watching my other show, China Uncensored, you know that by some estimates, millions of ethnic minorities in Xinjiang have been put into forced labor camps. Yeah, that sounds bad. It also looks bad when caught on drone footage. 5 of the world's top 6 producers of polysilicon are in China, and 4 of them have facilities in Xinjiang. And all 4 polysilicon manufacturers in Xinjiang have reported their participation in labor transfer or labor placement programs, which is a politically correct way of saying they use slave labor. I didn't realize you could just make up euphemisms for atrocities. No, Your Honor, he wasn't murdered. He participated in a bullet-to-the-face program. The reason why China relies on manual labor in Xinjiang is that solar panels are fragile. Around 0.3 millimeters thick, they can be easily broken if not handled properly. As a result, production in the past has largely been dependent on manual handling. According to Goldman Sachs, low costs from cheaper labor were a key factor in China's ability to lower production costs. Why do you think the US can't compete with cheap Chinese solar panels? With their methods, China never has to worry about a labor shortage. But if you think child labor in Africa and ethnic slave labor in China aren't reason enough to think twice about solar panels, stick around after the break. It gets even darker. Welcome back. So what's the big deal if solar panels use a little slave labor, right? If you don't care about that, you might still care about the devastating impact solar panels can have on the environment, especially when they're made in China. Wait, the country that doesn't care about enslaving mothers also doesn't care about Mother Nature? Color me surprised. See, making solar panels requires a lot of energy, and that energy's gotta come from somewhere. China's solution? Tons of cheap coal. That coal is a key reason why China's greenhouse gas emissions exceed those of all other developed countries combined. Luckily for China, there are huge coal reserves in Xinjiang. You know, the slave labor region. For years, China's low-cost coal-fired electricity has given the country's solar panel manufacturers a competitive advantage, allowing them to dominate global markets. Concerns are mounting in the US and Europe that the solar industry's reliance on Chinese coal will create a big increase in emissions in the coming years as manufacturers rapidly scale up production of solar panels to meet demand. You know, the kind of scaled-up demand that the Biden administration is now pushing for, which is actually very progressive of Biden, since all that coal will lead to more black and brown clouds in the sky. Representation matters. But scientists say solar panels are worth it in the long term. The energy they produce could offset the